You guys want to know what I think is amazing? Print. Print is such a fantastic technology. I mean, you put the words on the paper, and they stay there. You don't have to worry about keeping it updated all the time. Man, print is one of the greatest innovations of humankind. And so, with our 500 years of the printing press and the thousands of years that came before that of written documents, so much of what human communication is rooted in. The values, the aesthetics, the way that we show priority or hierarchy or relationships between concepts, the entire publishing workflow is all derived from what it took to get ink on paper. And then we had to go and invent the web. Which, I don't know, I mean, on balance, I think it's been totally worth it. But man, is it a pain in the ass. So the web just turned 25 years of the web. And when you look back at the history of this technology, the very foundations of where the web came from, hypertext markup language, HTML, and the Uniform Resource Locator, the URL. Those technologies were created from the start with the explicit intention that anyone, anywhere, could create a document that could be updated instantaneously and accessible globally. And when you kind of take a step back from like the day-to-day work that we all do and really just appreciate just how transformational that is in the history of human communication, just how different that is from ink on paper, 25 years isn't nearly enough time for humankind to have wrapped its head around the way that the web is different. And so for the last 25 years or so, we've essentially been able to kind of, I don't know, Band-Aid ourselves along. You know, we've kind of had training wheels on, where we've been imagining that, well, a web page, it's not really any different from a printed page, right? I mean, the same metaphors, the same techniques, they apply just as easily. I mean, just think of the screen like it's a sheet of paper, and all of your problems are solved. And then mobile came along. And to me, the real transformation, when I talk about content strategy in a mobile world, it's not about how do you figure out how to get your stuff onto a smartphone. The real transformation is that now, with the rise of mobile and tablet devices, we are now forced to come to terms with the way that the web is different. And I want to be clear about this. The web has always been different. But with the rise of these new devices, these new platforms, these new screen sizes, these new input mechanisms, we are now forced to give up our shared hallucination that we have any control over what size screen someone has or what type of device they're using to select. All of that is gone. And so when I talk about the challenges of publishing on mobile, what I really mean is how do we come up with new publishing practices that will allow us to accept that whatever device or platform or screen size or resolution or input mechanism our customers have where they want to interact with us, we have to figure out how to get our stuff there. And the thing is, this isn't going to stop. So I'm not a futurist, okay? I'm not here to predict for you what I think the next big thing is going to be. But I am going to promise you one thing. Whatever that next big thing is, you're going to have to be on it. I don't know, maybe the next big thing's going to be smart TV, right? There are a lot of hypotheses that the next big war in consumer electronics is going to be for the living room, and that device manufacturers are now going to try to get people to engage with their content and their brands from an interactive TV screen. And to me, this really starts to drive home the fallacy of what it means to assume that your screen is essentially the same as a piece of paper. The idea that we might treat Everything from the smallest smartphone screen all the way up through the giant TV as being the same page, it doesn't make sense. Or the idea that you know what mechanism, what goal someone has, and the difference between what they might be doing with one finger and one thumb, with a device that's very personal and intimate to them, all the way through something that they're engaging with from 10 feet away, with a controller that may be very different from everything you've seen before. The challenges here are in saying, what does it mean to get our content onto all of these platforms? Or, maybe some of you know about this, maybe the next thing is going to be in-car systems. Now, I don't think that the really interesting opportunity in the in-car system is having a touch screen in your dashboard or in the back seat of the car. No, the really interesting opportunity here is that what we will see is the intersection of touch-enabled device screens and audio interfaces. And when audio interfaces start to come into the mix, that means that we're going to have an entirely new channel, an entirely new platform to get our content onto. And the techniques and the tools that we used for something that is actually print now have to be translated to entirely different values to be accessible through voice. Now, I think there's a lot of people in the industry today that are kind of like, yeah, audio interfaces, totally not ready for prime time yet. I mean, right? Like you go talk to Siri and ask her some questions, and she just spits back garbage, and you're like, nah, audio. You know what else didn't work for a really long time? Touch screens. Touch screens were terrible. You remember you'd go to the ATM, and you'd have to figure out how to angle your finger just exactly right to get the button to push? For at least 2 decades, touchscreens were seen as this also-ran technology, not ever really going to make it into the mainstream. And then one day, touchscreens worked. They worked perfectly. And it transformed our entire industry in the space of, 5 years? So I don't know when audio interfaces are really going to hit. If it's 5 years, 15 years, 50 years, but I will bet you one day, the Star Trek computer is going to become a reality. And the last thing I want when I go talk to the Star Trek computer is to have it spit back at me, http://. Because the way that we have constructed our content is so tightly wedded to one presentation output that then when we try to take it to another platform, we can't do it. I sometimes have developers ask me, web developers say, Karen, why should we bother trying to parse out in our code? What's the difference between italics and what's the difference between emphasis? When every major browser since the dawn of time has rendered emphasis as italics. Not in an audio interface, they don't. One of those things conveys visual styling. The other conveys semantic meaning. In an audio interface, emphasis would be conveyed by tone of voice. And so if you can wrap your head around that example, if that kind of makes sense, down to the tiniest little HTML tag, we have to figure out ways to actually communicate the intent, the meaning of what we wanted to get across, even though up until this point, we've had visual tools to do it. If you have any interest in this kind of stuff, I would encourage you, check out what's going on with Google and what they call their conversation group. So Google is a company that can make cars that drive themselves. And that's not even Google's core business. That's just some weird side project they dreamed up. No, how human beings interact with technology through language, that is Google's core business. And they are investing really heavily right now in how to make audio interfaces a reality. So if that's the case, I don't know, maybe the next big thing is going to be Google Glass, right? I don't really think Google Glass is going to be the next big thing. I think Google Glass is like the Segway of mobile. It's like a Segway, but for your face. But the idea that wearable devices will, in fact, become a reality, that is true. I worked with a large industrial products company this past year. So there's a huge industrial products company. What they do is they sell products that would be intended to be used in large factories on the factory floor. And they print this giant catalog every year. And I went in and I talked to them, and I said, look, guys, I'm not here to tell you when you're going to stop printing your catalog. Okay? That might be 5 years, it might be 15 years from now. But let's all just agree that a day will come where it will not be worth it to you anymore to print this catalog. What happens when that day comes and the most viable form factor for you to get your product information out onto is a wearable device? That the environment in which your customers operate, they're on the factory floor, that having a heads-up wearable display might be exactly the kind of device that they want to use. And it's much more likely that they'll have something like this than, say, walk back into the office and use a desktop computer. What do you have to do starting right now to figure out your publishing process so that on the day when you decide to stop printing that catalog, your content isn't locked up in the InDesign files and the print production workflow intended to make that printed document? That your content will be ready to be displayed on whatever device it needs to go. The organizations that start thinking that right now, start trying to figure out how do we embrace that future, those are the organizations that are going to survive. But OK, Google Glass. What about watches? A lot of people talking about watches as the next big thing. Galaxy Gear, the Pebble, Apple's rumored to be coming out with a watch. And when I talk about watches, people are always like, oh, Karen, come on. Like, who really wants to read a document on their watch? And you're right. That's probably not the use case. But when you think of watches as existing in a larger ecosystem of devices, that your watch might be the controller for your smart TV, that your watch might provide a touchscreen interface that allows you to navigate and then listen to information from your audio interface. Now that watch, as part of the ecosystem, becomes an even more important part of that content publishing process. Just because someone might not want to read a long document on their watch doesn't mean that the information won't have to be navigable from it. And so titles and information, metadata about whatever it is, still has to have a publishing process, still has to be visible on this tiny little screen. But I know, watches, so tiny, probably not the next big thing, right? Maybe the next big thing is going to be stadium scoreboards. Yeah, come on, guys. Let's get our content where everybody can see it. This is a joke. I put this in here as a joke. I thought it was funny, because like, watches are so tiny, and then scoreboards are so big. And then I turned around, and I talked to a client who said that the biggest publishing problem that they have today is digital signage. It's a university client. And they came, oops, not the refrigerator, that's coming next. So it was a university client. And they came to me and they said, Karen, we just bought these new digital screens that we want to put up all over campus. And what we need is a way that we can publish this, the same information to our website, to our mobile app, and now to these digital signs. And I was like, hey, have you thought about treating the digital signs as if they're a completely separate silo and workflow and just maintain them independently? And they were like, Karen, ain't nobody got time for that. No. We want a way that things like campus alerts or information for students or events listings or what's going on around campus can be managed and maintained in one place and then automatically published to 3 very different form factors. This isn't some crazy futuristic dystopia that these people are living in. This is a real problem that they have to solve today, right now. So if digital signage is an issue in the enterprise, maybe then, in the future, you will be solving the same problem at home in your refrigerator. Can't talk about the future without talking about the internet refrigerator, right, guys? It's like, I think the biggest problem facing our society today is that I can't check Twitter in the 30 seconds that it takes me to get a Diet Coke. So the internet refrigerator, that I think really is the also-ran technology. Like, that's never really going to happen. But the idea that there will be a network of connected devices and sensors and screens in your home. That will happen. And heck, it might not be the internet refrigerator, but what if it's an internet-enabled cooktop? I mean, what if the glass top of your cooktop had an iPad embedded in it, and you could automatically navigate through recipes or cooking videos or news information right there from your cooktop? Or, and I do think that this is the big problem that we are trying to solve today, what happens when toaster printers become a reality? Is your content going to be ready to be burned onto delicious toast? These are the problems that we're here to solve today, okay? Together. So right now, today, organizations are already faced with the challenge of how do they get their content out onto a variety of different platforms. They have the web, and now there's the mobile web. They have mobile apps and then tablet apps. They have blogs, and they want to publish to social media. They have an email newsletter. They have an intranet. Heck, even some of them are still wrestling with print. And tomorrow, there will be ever more devices and platforms for which we have to get our content onto. It is a veritable zombie apocalypse of new devices and platforms and screen sizes and resolutions and input mechanisms. How are we going to battle the zombies? They keep coming too quickly. And I want to be clear about this. It doesn't matter to me if you think that any one of these new platforms is going to be the next big thing. I don't care if you come to me and you're like, Karen, watch is not buying it. Because I will guarantee you one thing, and it's that humanity's desire for new devices and platforms has not yet been sated. There will be a next big thing. There will be a new platform. There will be a new place that you need to publish your content to. And so the organizations that survive the zombie apocalypse have to ask themselves the question starting now: how do we protect ourselves from the zombies? And the answer is that the organizations that succeed are the ones that will stop thinking about how they publish to any one particular platform, and instead change their entire publishing mindset to embrace the idea of publishing to any platform, any device, equally. And what that requires, what I think is the true transformation that I'm talking about when I talk about mobile, is the true separation of content from form. And this, I mean, the idea that we have to get away from imagining a page, that our content can be locked to one particular page or designed for one particular output, and instead have to embrace at the very foundations of what we publish, the fluid and flexible nature of the web. Do you get just what a big deal it is, just how transformational that is in the history of human communication? I mean, if you imagine, this medieval monk laboriously hand-scribing documents, or you imagine Gutenberg, hand-setting movable type, the idea that you would go to either of these men and suggest that we needed to find a way to communicate the message, to communicate the structure and the priority and the hierarchy and the relationships between ideas in that document, separate from its form, separate from its presentation, separate from any one particular output. That wouldn't have made any sense. There's no way, up until this point in human communication, there was no way to separate content from form. And yet today, on the web, with mobile devices and the zombie apocalypse of new platforms, that is exactly the challenge that we are faced with. How do we figure out how to communicate these ideas in a way that is not directly dependent on any one particular presentation, any one particular look and feel? And so when Dan Jacobson from Netflix, he's the API guy from Netflix, he's formerly from NPR, when he says that the future of content management systems is in their ability to capture the content in a clean, presentation-independent way, What this suggests is that we need to solve this problem by getting our content creators to stop marking up their content with formatting information. And so when you see the tools that we give our content creators, that give them an editing interface in the tools that they use to publish to the web that works just like Microsoft Word. This particular one from Vignette describes their product as the Word-like interface, makes content creation easy for business users who know nothing about HTML and want to keep it that way. And I describe this as the WYSIWYG problem. WYSIWYG means what you see is what you get. And it means that we've given content creators this giant blob that's kind of like a page, and we give them a toolbar at the top that's just like the toolbar in Microsoft Word. And we tell them why, yes, you can go in and you can do whatever you want to this content. You can add a table and some custom image bullets, and you can take this box here and float it to the right. And all of those decisions that those content creators are making, all of those choices about what they want that document to look like, none of those make the leap when you try to take that content and put it on another platform. The choice that that content creator made in saying, I want to float this box to the right, they weren't making a decision about where they wanted that box to appear on the screen. What they were saying is, this table of contents should be set off somehow from the document. It should be a sidebar or an aside. But the only tools that we gave them to work with were tools that were so based on what the document would look like that now we have no way to communicate that when we take this to another platform. So I describe this as the WYSIWYG problem. And I've kind of gotten the reputation of being like the president of the WYSIWYG haters club. And as much as I love coming out and getting to talk to groups of people like you, I'm kind of proud of the fact that my graffiti crime spree is going exceptionally well. I feel like I'm really getting the message out this way. So when I talk about the WYSIWYG problem, like sometimes people will come up to me and developers especially, and they're like, yeah, WYSIWYG sucks, Markdown all the way. And I'm like, well, I don't care about the toolbar. I mean, I don't care if somebody has like a bar at the top of their screen that allows them to actually embed formatting. No, what I care about is that we are using an antiquated mental model to communicate to content creators what it means to publish on the web. You guys know where WYSIWYG came from? It came from Xerox. It came from Xerox PARC. Because they invented the laser printer. Think about this for a minute. Xerox, up until this point, could only make a copy of a document that already existed. Xerox invented a laser printer technology that would allow you to print out whatever you wanted. Except they needed a way for you to actually be able to create that document. And so Xerox invented the entire concept of the graphical user interface, the entire concept of this what you see is what you get editing interface, so that they could sell laser printers. And so the drive for laser printers was, in fact, the most important component of the personal computing revolution. People bought personal computers. Organizations adopted personal computers. They adopted the graphical user interface because they wanted the capacity to create documents using tools where someone could see on their screen the same thing that they were going to get when they printed it out on their laser printer next to their desk. And in a very real sense, the web was born out of that graphical user interface revolution. And in many ways, all of us have jobs today because of the rise of the personal computer and the rise of these kinds of WYSIWYG editing tools. And so I feel like I can say with a great deal of respect for this technology, this process, this workflow, this way of thinking about publishing, that I can still tell you that the web is not a laser printer. The web has nothing in common with the laser printer. I mean, there is nothing about getting your content out onto a web page or a mobile device or Google Glass that has really anything in common with what it means to print something out on the laser printer next to your desk. The web is more powerful than that. Ted Nelson, hypertext pioneer, says that imitating paper on a computer screen is like tearing the wings off of a 747 and using it as a bus on the highway. The web is more powerful. The web is more flexible. The web can do so many things that paper cannot. And yet, we still give content creators an antiquated mental model derived from the desktop publishing revolution of 40 years ago to communicate to them what it means to publish on the web. I describe this as a war. We today are fighting a war of blobs versus chunks. Blobs are those messy, formatting-rich, presentation-dependent globs of content that are locked into one particular output format because there's no way to get at the actual content and the meaning of the content separate from any particular choices that were made to get that content into one particular format. And chunks are clean, presentation-independent, well-structured bits of content that have been created from the start that they can and will live on any different platform. This is a war, people. We cannot let the blobs win. So, how do we protect ourselves? The zombies are at the door. What are we going to do? Well, it requires 4 things. First, we have to start with structured content. We have to start with content that isn't blobbed out on one particular page, but rather has the right structure in it. Second, we have to add semantic metadata to that content so that the metadata describes what the intent or the meaning of the content is, separate from what it should look like. Third, we need to create what I call content packages, which are alternate forms of the content, so that they might have more flexibility for different presentations or different outputs. And finally, most important, we have to create an author experience for our content creators and our employees that is designed to help them create good content. Let me talk about each one of these in turn. I'll start with structured content. So let me take you back to the halcyon days of the 1980s when America had a favorite magazine. And that magazine was the TV Guide. Never let it be said that Americans don't read. And so TV Guide, 1980s, most popular magazine in America. And they might justifiably have patted themselves on the back and been like, good job, guys, we are the best magazine. We are the best magazine out there. But they didn't do that because they knew that they weren't in the magazine publishing business. They were in the content publishing business. And so way back in the 1980s, they built this green screen mainframe application to serve as sort of a proto-database, like a proto-CMS. And they went and they told all of their writers that when they're writing these program descriptions, they now have to enter all of that information into the database, so the title and the genre and who appears in it. And more than that, they said every time you write a program description now, you're not just going to write one form. You're going to write 3 different forms. You're going to write a short form, write a medium form, and write a long form. And if you've ever worked with writers, I think you can probably imagine what their response was. Predictably, it was, why? Why? Why are we doing this? Why? You just tripled my workload. Why are we doing this? They didn't know. They didn't know what they were going to do with all these variations of their content. They didn't know that one day you were going to have a cable box that was going to hook up to your television set and basically replace your TV Guide. They didn't know that one day TiVo was going to come along and revolutionize the television industry, revolutionize the advertising industry by giving you it as essentially a giant programmable VCR that hooks up to your TV. And they most certainly did not know that one day you were going to have a magical pocket robot that you could pull out and it would talk to your television set. You could pull this thing out of your pocket and say, hey, go record this show for me, and it would do it. They had no idea that those program descriptions were going to wind up going to all of these different platforms. But what they did know is that if all of those program descriptions were locked up in Quark files, were locked up in one particular medium, were locked up in a format that was only good for print, they would not be able to get as much value out of their content. And so today, if you pull up this TV Guide app on your phone, and you browse for a program that aired in the 1980s, that program description that you will see is the exact same content that someone wrote 30 or 40 years ago. They are still making money off of that content today because they created the right structure. And so the value there came in having those variations, but it also came in the fact that they added the right semantic metadata to their content. I love these two quotes. Metadata is the new art direction, and metadata is a love note to the future. So the first one implies that in the zombie apocalypse of new devices and platforms, we cannot survive by having art directors and designers lovingly handcraft every page in the same way that we might have for print. And don't get me wrong, art directors and designers are every bit as important as ever. But the idea that we cannot treat each output, each device, each platform as if it is its own special handcrafted thing, instead, we're going to have to get the robots to help us. And the way that the robots will help us is by ensuring that we have the right metadata attached to our content so that they can make styling decisions or flow information dynamically. And the second one, metadata as a love note to the future, I think is a powerful statement that says that the investment that organizations put in to structuring their content, making sure that the right information is attached to it, that investment pays off. TV Guide had no idea 30 years ago what they were going to do with their metadata. But having put the investment into it has given them more value over time. So The Guardian ran into this problem when they launched these things called topic pages. So topic pages are automated pages where they go in and matched on a particular proper noun or a known term from the database. The Guardian can go in and have a dynamically generated page that shows all of the articles that ever mentioned Tony Blair. Great for SEO, nice resource for users. So when they came up with these pages, they put this nice big box here at the top called Top Story. That's where the most important thing that they have is going to go. Except once they launched these things, they realized something. They had no way of knowing what the top story was. They had no way of knowing in their database whether one story was more important than another. And so for these topic pages, their solution was, as you might imagine, to make their editors do more work. So they told them, OK, every time something hits the CMS, you need to go in and manually encode that story 1 to 5. And that way, we'll be able to judge whether something is more important than another. Here's the thing. They got a ton of editorial priority metadata about which stories are more important than the other. It's all locked up in the layout of the print edition. You don't need to read a word on that screen to be able to judge how important that story is. Visual cues like the size of the typography, the style of the typography, the placement of the story, the number of column inches devoted to the story, the placement of the image, the use of color, and other layout cues. All of those tell you, at a glance, you can tell how important the stories on this page are, and you could even compare them to other stories over time, simply based on those visual cues. And all of that, somebody's entire job was making editorial decisions to cue how important something was, and none of that made the leap when they took those stories and moved them into a digital format. So for their iPad edition, The Guardian did something different. They wrote an algorithm that goes in and reads the layout, reads the InDesign files for the layout of the print edition. And that algorithm is taught to look at the same kind of cues that a human would, column inches, typography, placement, layout. And then that algorithm derives editorial priority metadata that is then used to lay out the iPad edition. The iPad edition isn't a copy. It's not a picture of the print edition. But the placement, the sizing, the size of the boxes for all of those stories on the iPad are dynamically generated based on the metadata that were derived from the print edition. Now, I don't tell this story because I think the solution to this problem is algorithms that read print files. I think that's a very specific case. But I like this story because I think it really drives home how much information we have encoded through visual styling, how much information that is so deeply embedded in what we grasp through the way something looks that we forget that those cues don't translate when we take things to another platform. And so as a result, we have to find new ways. We have to find new cues, new ways of structuring that information so that when we want to get our content out onto a variety of different platforms, we don't wind up having to do the same work over and over again to have things render appropriately. A third thing is that we need to start thinking about creating packages of information, content packages. So I led the redesign of the New York Times back in 2005. And one of the things that you learn when you work with the publishing industry is that they have a production workflow for creating images that will be used in a variety of contexts. So they create a set of different crop sizes of images. And so when you look at an image like this, I like this example because you can look at it and say, OK, in a sense, all of these are the same image. Any place that that story needed to appear or a reference to that story needed to appear on the homepage, on a landing page, in a mobile device, in print, any one of these images could be used to represent that story. But just because they are, in essence, the same image does not mean that they are identical images. Each one of these can stand in for the whole, but they are not the exact same thing. So when I did this redesign of the Times back in 2005, we came up with this set of crop sizes. And those are the crop sizes that the Times used as they started moving on to new mobile platforms and new devices. And if I knew then what I know now, if I knew what all of those different platforms and requirements would be, might we have chosen slightly different crop sizes? Sure, probably. We didn't intend these crop sizes to work well on any particular platform. But we were still able to make it work as they made the leap to new platforms. And so if you can kind of wrap your head around that, if you can wrap your head around the idea that a set of image sizes will help make the leap, if you have this flexible package, it'll make the leap to other platforms. If that makes sense for images, then you can probably wrap your head around the idea that that will work as well for text. One of my favorite little pet peeves in the publishing industry is news organizations or publishing organizations that truncate their headlines. Here's an example from the Daily Beast. It's a magazine in the US where I can just see the design decisions that went into this. They're like, well, we can't possibly have enough space to show the entire headline here because, well, that's going to take away from our ability to have a giant glob of white space in the middle of the page. Very important to us. NPR is America's national public radio. NPR is like my go-to example of how to do publishing right on the web. And even NPR truncates their headlines in their mobile app. The Guardian has an entire Tumblr that is devoted to celebrating the work of the tireless men and women who shorten headlines so they'll fit on your phone. And I just want to look at this and shake my fist at it and go, don't you understand what your business model is? You have no other business model besides having a story, having someone read the headline of that story, decide that they want to read the story, and then click or tap on it. That's it. That's all there is. And I have people say sometimes, well, Karen, truncation, that's just the way it's done. Honestly, when you think about what's going to work, it's like, what could possibly go wrong? Truncation is not a content strategy, OK? The idea that we are going to succeed in mobile publishing by by chopping off the ends of headlines and then shoving them on another device, it's not going to work. And so finally, the real challenge that we have in ensuring that publishing is going to work across all of these different devices is having an author experience for the content creators who are managing and maintaining the information on their screen that is going to support a great experience. So I get to see a lot of companies' content management underpants. And I go in and I see these things that people have to use that look like a database got drunk and vomited all over the screen. I mean, it's like fields and checkboxes. And I asked somebody how they publish to the web, and they're like, OK, well, you ignore all this stuff because it doesn't matter. And then there's this one field down here that's super important, so don't forget it. It's a mess. And when I talk to people about the need for structured content, the need for semantic metadata, I often have people come back and they're like, no, Karen, nuh-uh, never going to work in my organization. See, my users, my employees, my content creators, they hate all the fields in our CMS. Like, they beg for something that works just like Microsoft Word. Like, what they're insistent about, what they know is that what they want is a tool that has a familiar WYSIWYG interface that's just the way they want it to work. And I'm extraordinarily sympathetic to this, and yet I believe that we, as an industry, can do better. I'm going to share a favorite quote from you. It comes from Henry Ford, except he never actually said it. And I don't care, I'm going to use it anyway. He said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Right now, today, what we are doing on the web is we are building people faster horses. We are giving them tools that encourage them to imagine that the web is like print, that encourage them to think of content publishing as if it is a familiar interface that they've been using for the past 25 years. And in fact, instead of building them faster horses, we need to build them cars. We need to make new mental models, new interfaces, new technologies that will allow them to understand how web publishing, how true multi-channel, multi-device publishing is different. And I know this can happen. And the reason that I know it can happen is because I have seen it happen in the world of graphic design. So graphic designers taught a value system derived from print have had to abandon or give up some of their most deeply held values about what it means to publish for print, and instead embrace a new value system that is derived from the fluid, flexible nature of the web. And I have seen them succeed. If graphic designers can embrace a new way of working, content creators can too. And so if you were to run an e-commerce website, and I bet many of you do run an e-commerce website, you would know everything there was to know about that funnel. You would, if your website had some forms that people fill out, and they would go through that series of forms, and then at the end of the process, they would give you money, why, you would know every single thing there was to know about how you made those forms easier. You would go in, and any place you saw red in that funnel, any place you saw drop-offs or errors or mistakes happening where people were getting through the process and then something was going wrong with the form and they weren't able to give you money at the end of it, well, you'd go in and optimize that. You'd fix it. So if you're in the business of creating content, and I assure you, you are in the business of creating content, then that funnel, that funnel of how one of your employees, how your content creators go through and actually update that information, that is every bit as important to business value as that e-commerce checkout process. And yet, I don't know anybody. I've been talking about this for 4 years now, and I don't know anybody who has ever done usability testing on their content management system. And so every minute that your team is spending fighting with technology, fighting with publishing tools that don't meet their needs, that's lost business value. And so I'm a UX person through and through, and I believe that beautiful software, great tools, even for employees, even for back-end users, shouldn't be seen as a luxury. It should be seen as an expectation. And I'm not saying that just because I'm a UX person and I want happy users. I'm saying that because I believe that having better tools means more business value. It means that if you have better publishing process, if you have better publishing tools, then you will create better content. You will create content that has the right structure in it, that has the right metadata attached to it. You will be able to create alternate forms of it. You will be able to have content that will survive the zombie apocalypse and be able to get your content onto whatever platform you need it to go to. I will leave you with this. The web isn't print. The value systems that we have from publishing ink on paper, the tools, the processes that we use, the visual techniques to communicate priority or hierarchy or relationships, all of those don't work on the web. And so it means that the way that people create content has to change. The way that people think about what it means to publish to the web has to change. Our future depends on fighting off the zombies. Our future depends on being able to survive the zombie apocalypse of new devices and platforms and screen sizes and resolutions and input devices, and they're never going to stop. The organizations that start thinking now about how they truly separate their content from form, how they truly create structured content, those are the organizations that are going to survive. And I hope that you are one of them. Thank you.